Welcome to the Wang Reviewer. My name is Will, where I do tech unboxing, tech reviews, and tech tutorials. And in today's episode, I'm going to replace my Noctua CPU cooler fan with the liquid cooling AIO cooling fan. And I'm going to give you my main reasons why I replaced my Noctua fan. I'm also going to show you how to install a liquid AIO cooler fan. So as you're watching, you found this video helpful, please remember to give a thumbs up, like the video, and consider subscribing to my channel for similar content. This is my new setup of the all-in-one CPU water cooler. This is actually the Arctic Liquid Freezer II 120 millimeter, and I replaced it. So here it is, fully installed, 120 millimeter rad out here. The pipe's going to the CPU cooler, and this one also has a VRAM fan, just supposed to make it cooler. This is replacing my Noctua NH-U14S CPU Cooler. And this is what it looks like. And here's a side profile. You can see it's quite beefy and it's quite heavy. So I just want to quickly talk about the Noctua NH-U14S. So this is the Noctua NH-14S. It comes in two pieces. The first piece is the 120 millimeter fan that you just they give you mounting brackets, so you mount against the CPU cooler or heatsink. And this is the actual heatsink itself. It is very solid. Here's the bottom part, which would connect onto the CPU, and it's very thick and it's very well done. And these are the heat pipes that goes through it. There's two reasons why I replaced the Noctua CPU fan, and the first one is the size. This size is really big, and when you put it into the tower, it actually takes up a lot of space. And I think this was actually impeding some of the airflow within my CPU. So that's the first thing. The second reason is these mounting brackets that it comes with to mount the CPU onto it. So this piece is just one for the AMD mounting bracket. What I would do here is I would just mount it to here. So this would mount onto your motherboard. This piece here. There's a screw, there's a spacer, and then you would just mount that on to here. And the issue I have are these screwing mechanisms for the mount. So right here. So this is the screw and this is the screwing mechanism. And as you can see, it did not take a lot of turn, and that's it. I can't turn it anymore, and that's it. And with the spacer, I'm just going to show you with the spacer. There is still a large gap in the spacer, even with the mounting bracket in between. And so you can't really, I found I couldn't secure this mounting brackets to the motherboard. And what happened was, because these aren't very deep in their threads, as you're screwing it in, I couldn't tighten the mounting brackets adequately enough to the CPU, to the motherboard, pardon me. And about a month ago, one of these caps came undone and hit the tempered glass, which made that pinging noise. So what I had to do was I actually had to completely take the CPU cooler off, apply thermal paste to the CPU again, remount, screw this back in place properly, and then remount the cooler again. So that's the first time. And then about 2 weeks ago, I went to boot up my computer and it wouldn't boot up, and I couldn't figure out why. And when I looked at my computer, I realized, I was troubleshooting, that this CPU had completely, the two mounting brackets, so those are here. The two mounting brackets at the top actually came undone, and my CPU was sitting this way, leaning against my GPU. And these two screws actually popped up. And I think it has to do with the weight of the CPU on a tower setup. And just to give you an idea how much this weighs. So if I put, so this weighs close to 703 grams or 704 grams. And I think because the weight of the CPU cooler is not good enough for this mounting mechanism that Noctua has. And when it came off, it wouldn't boot is because the CPU and the thermal paste, the CPU is actually stuck onto the cooler itself and actually unseated it from the motherboard, which is a bit concerning, considering that there's a locking mechanism in the motherboard to lock the CPU in place, and it actually completely took it right off. And due to this, I think, mounting hardware setup, or maybe how I installed it, or user error, I just wasn't comfortable with using this cooler anymore because I didn't want the CPU to keep unseating from the motherboard, because I know that can damage both the CPU and the motherboard, which are expensive to replace. So this is why I replaced this with an AIO cooler, because the AIO cooler is smaller and I didn't have to deal with the weight of having a passive, like a heatsink like this. But also I was wondering if, and then part of me also thinks that this will improve the airflow in my case, because as you can see, this is pretty big, and I think it was impeding some of my fan circulating the air through the case. And so I think this has something to do with it as well. I'm not sure, but this is just a guess I have. So let's unbox the AIO cooler, install it, and we'll go from there. So I purchased the Arctic Liquid Feezer II 120mm rad. It has a 2-year warranty on it. In terms of the boxing, there's really nothing much to unbox. It came with the mounting brackets, screws, and the rad and pump itself. Here's a closer look at the AIO. This is my first AIO, and the build quality looks pretty good. The water is already self-contained, and there's nothing for me to fill. The tubes are bright and thick, and then there's that VRAM fan on the pump, which is supposed to help cool down the CPU even more. The first step for my setup is I'm going to have to remove the existing Noctua cooler fan from the back of the case so I can put the radiator on there. The second step is obviously mounting the radiator to it and playing around with the orientation of it. For the third step, since I have an AMD CPU, there's an AMD mounting bracket. I'm going to have to remove the old screws used for the Noctua cooler so I can use it for the new AIO pump. The fourth step, I'm going to secure the AMD mounting plate onto the motherboard by using duct tape to hold it in place so I can put the screws in. So when I was putting the duct tape, I made sure I wasn't touching anything that shouldn't be. And when I turned over, the holes on the motherboard should align with the mounting bracket, making it easy for me to mount the pump. For the fifth step, because I'm using an AMD mounting bracket, they do have some brackets I have to attach to the water pump. There's 2 of them, 1 for each side. Very easy to put in, 1 screw each. The sixth step, the kit comes with its own thermal paste according to the instructions. You use the whole package. I just emptied it in the middle of the die. The seventh step, remove the protective sticker off the pump so the thermal paste can actually make contact with the pump itself. The eighth step, mount the pump to the CPU. There are 4 screws. And remember to screw it in an X pattern to evenly apply the pressure of the pump against the CPU die. You don't want to do one side because it might lift up the other side and not creating constant contact. For the ninth step, it's recommended not to just plug it into any of the case fan headers found on your motherboard. On the motherboard, there's a specific one for the AIO header and it's treated differently. I had to look at the motherboard diagram to make sure I found the correct header. So I'm using the X57D Prime. Here I am booting it for the first time to make sure the pump was working and the computer posted correctly. It does make some gurgling noise when you first boot up as the water is starting to cycle through the pump, and it does this for about a minute. Alright, so that concludes my video why I switched from a Noctua CPU cooler fan to an all-in-one liquid cooling pump for my CPU. I hope you found this video helpful. If you have any questions or comments, please leave it down below. I would love to hear from you. Please stay tuned for an upcoming video where I am going to benchmark my CPU temperatures using the AIO I just installed. In that video, I'm also going to talk about the airflow of my case and the final setup and configuration of using the Noctua fans and how I arrange them from intake to exhaust and how many fans I use. So some experimenting over a couple of weeks, I found my perfect setup for my needs, and I'm gonna present that in an upcoming video as well. I know there's been a lot of interest related to that. All right, so thank you guys for watching, and until next time.